What happens when we listen, really listen, to stories long silenced, to truths that were hidden, denied or ignored? In 2021, the Victorian government set up a truth-telling commission, the first of its kind in Australia. It's called the Yoorrook Justice Commission. Its job? To uncover the truth of what's happened and what's still happening to First Peoples in Victoria since colonisation, and to present a fuller, more truthful history of Victoria. I'm Tamsin Peach, and this is History Lab, where we explore the gaps between us and the past. Today we'll join the Walk for Truth, which is being led by Yoorrook Commissioner Travis Lovett. Over 25 days, he has been walking the 400 kilometres from Portland in southwestern Victoria to Parliament House in Melbourne. This conversation with him was recorded as part of a new episode of our Kids History podcast, Hey History, that is dedicated to the Yoorrook Justice Commission. You can listen to that on the Hey History feed, but we thought that many of our History Lab listeners would also be interested in what Yoorrook means, especially for the relationship between history, truth-telling and education. We're in the small town of Port Fairy in southwest Victoria. It's about 3 hours from Melbourne, past the Great Ocean Road. There's a big crowd in a church car park, and everyone's excited when Travis Lovett arrives.
Hey! How cool is this?
All right, everyone, gathering.
How's it going? Good?
Good.
Yeah? Deadly? Yeah, good? How you going? Good? How you going? All right, good? Hey, that's it. Good to see you all. Hey, Nata.
We do have some traffic management when we're crossing roads, so please just stay safe. Trav, did you want to say anything before we
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that we're still on the lands of the Gunditjmara people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Travis Lovett, Gunditjmara meeting, Linyan Kokon Kenen Konatere Kujbim, Yumbin meeting. I just acknowledge that I'm a proud Gunditjmara and Karapmara man, and I've travelled from my country. We're going to hit the road pretty soon. Appreciate everyone coming out and making the time and effort as well, and also for the school as well in carrying our banner as well. To Delhi, everyone, and more to say when we start walking. Look after yourselves, be safe. High five. Let's walk for truth. All right, good. Delhi, we'll put the thing at the front here, right?
We leave the church car park, and this leg of the Walk for Truth begins. There's over 200 people walking with the Commissioner down the street towards the centre of Port Fairy. This is only day 4 of the walk. Travis is walking for 25 days all up. He started in Portland in southwestern Victoria, and he'll arrive at Parliament House in Melbourne. The Walk for Truth carries on a tradition of First Nations people walking on country and walking off country, as Travis explains how he got the idea for the walk.
You're going to find this pretty funny. I was sitting on my couch at home, just resting after a long day's at work, and I turned to my wife and I said, I'm going to walk from Portland to Parliament. True story. I just said, that's it. I'm going to do it. And my wife, Renata, looked at me and she was like, really? Like, really? And I'm like, yeah, really. So that's where the idea came from. But also as well, part of our history is that Aboriginal people have walked across the land for tens of thousands of years. So what we are doing right now today is we are doing that. We're walking across the land. We're walking across the land together. So we've had a number of walks on the land for many years where our people were rounded up and segregated from non-Aboriginal people for a long period of time, and out of protest to challenge the government, our people walked off those particular areas to highlight the bad things that were happening to Aboriginal people at those times. One of those was a big leader in our community, which was William Barak, and he led a walk off Corrandirk Aboriginal mission. Then there was another walk-off many years later of the Cumragunja mission in Yoorrook Bangarang Country around Shepparton Way. So we have always walked on country, and we've always walked for our people's rights.
And the walk's starting point, the town of Portland, was carefully chosen.
I'm an Aboriginal person from Portland, but also as well, user learning about colonisation in Victoria, and colonisation started in 1834 with the arrival of the Henty family, the Henty brothers. So not only as a proud Gunditjmara man, but also where colonisation started was where my people are from. Walk for Truth, that's a good question. Well, I'm one of the commissioners on our Truth-Telling Commission, and we are looking into past government decisions about our community and our people. So we're about to hand over a report and recommendations back to the government to make changes for all our Victorians' future. Because I'm a commissioner on the Truth-Telling Commission and I'm walking, so I decided to call it Walk for Truth. Truth, 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 truth.
We'll leave the Walk for Truth for now to talk with Dr Matthew Keynes.
I'm Dr Matthew Keynes. I'm a researcher at the University of Melbourne. So I studied truth-telling commissions around the world, Canada, in Sweden, Norway, Finland, including here in Australia. Truth-telling has many different meanings, especially for First Nations people, but broadly it involves openly sharing truths about the past, particularly truths about crimes, wrongs and injustices that happened in the past and how they continue to shape our lives. But truth-telling is more than just sharing the bad or difficult or negative things that have happened. It's also about telling the full story of Australia's history, and that means making sure that the history we learn is not just the story that started when the British arrived here in 1788. It's also the 65,000 plus years of history on this continent.
What can we all get from being truthful about our history?
Well, we've all probably had that experience of covering something up or not being completely honest about something that's difficult. And we also probably have experienced being truthful in those moments, and that feels a lot better. It's almost like a relief. So at the moment, Australia as a country is not being entirely honest about its history, and understanding Australia's true history is what will make us a better society and makes us better people. However, knowing the truth is not the only thing. We also have to match that knowing with our actions to make up for what's happened and to make sure that they don't happen again.
Over 4 years, the Yoorrook Justice Commission travelled across Victoria, visiting cities, towns and remote communities to listen deeply to First Peoples. Yoorrook commissioners and specifically trained staff called Truth Receivers sat with elders, community leaders and everyday people, listening to their stories. They didn't just hold formal hearings.
We've gone to people's houses, we've sat in their front yard or their backyard, but also we went to visit young people who are in jail at the moment. We went to visit people everywhere, anywhere and everywhere where people wanted us to visit them.
They met people in quiet rooms, in their homes and on country, so that they could speak freely and safely.
We have been really flexible about that. A lot of times in other commissions that do this kind of work, people have to travel to the city. But we have taken a different approach where we see that everyone is important across the state, all Aboriginal people that we have travelled to make sure they feel involved in this process as well and provide us with ideas on what needs to change in the future so everyone has the same opportunities as each other.
Testimony was given in many forms: spoken words, written statements, artwork, music, dance and ceremony.
We've also had people who have drawn their stories and their lives using artwork. We have one particular elder who's come and actually shared a song via playing the gum leaf, for instance.
At the heart of Yoorrook's work is truth-telling about the invasion and the ongoing impact of colonisation on First Nations peoples in Victoria. One of Yoorrook's first major investigations looked at the child protection and criminal justice systems, two areas where harm is still happening right now. A second focus area was land justice, asking who controls what happens on country. How can First Peoples lead its protection and management? And the Commission also looked into economic justice, into barriers to wealth, employment, education and housing that have resulted from colonisation and discriminatory systems. Sometimes the testimony spoke to interpersonal racism and exclusion, like the experience of Elder Auntie Nellie Flagg at school.
I didn't realise that white kids didn't like me simply because I was black, because I was Aboriginal. They wouldn't play with me, they wouldn't talk to me, they wouldn't do anything with me. We were taught folk dancing. We had to line up, the boys on one side, the girls on the other side. And then they put on the music over the loudspeaker and we had to sashay in and put your hands out, and the boy or the girl takes each other's hand. Well, when I put my hands out, the white boy who was opposite me, he wouldn't take my hand. So I just stood there and stepped out of line. My brother, he saw what happened. My brother came down and he danced with me.
And there were also many stories of systemic racism and injustice, like Elder Uncle Henry Atkinson recalls.
We weren't allowed to have playtime at the same time as other kids. We weren't really encouraged to be good at school. We weren't allowed to play sport. We weren't allowed to really exceed educational-wise. You were always kept down and you really didn't get any grading of any kind.
Even though many of the stories were painful, full of injustice and deep sadness, people also spoke with strength. They shared how culture is still alive, how they're teaching language, dance and stories to the next generation, and how, despite everything, they're still fighting for justice. To support the personal stories shared by Aboriginal people, the Yoorrook Justice Commission gathered a huge amount of evidence. More than 10,000 documents. And they've got an online evidence library you can visit on their website. Some of this evidence is the testimony of non-Aboriginal people as well, churches, services and the state government.
Being a commissioner on this commission, you also have power to also ask people to come before the commission and talk about the work that they've done that has made bad decisions for Aboriginal people and controlled their lives and segregated them from everybody else, about how they benefited from taking the land and the role that they played in taking away Aboriginal languages and stopped our people or Aboriginal people from practicing their culture. So we invited churches, health services to come forward as well. And it was important to us and important to Aboriginal people that they said, yes, we did do that. They acknowledged that they were wrong and that it is wrong and that it shouldn't have happened. And they want to be a part of how we move forward together. And the Premier of Victoria, the Premier Jacinta Allan, came to our commission to talk about what the government has done and what the government is still doing to Aboriginal people.
I have learnt much that I did not know in terms of the true history of the dispossession, what the settlers, the colonisers did when they came to Victoria. I did not know of the massacres, I'm ashamed to say. Still, the record of our state's history is incomplete. Like many Victorians, my formal education of Aboriginal people's histories and experiences was limited. The record this Commission will hand down will mean at long last the truth of our state's history is told.
And when the truth about the past is told, how would Commissioner Travis Lovett like non-Aboriginal people to respond?
There has been a lot of bad things to happen to our people, and we're not asking people to feel bad about what's happened or apologise to us, but we're trying to ask people to understand and think about what's really happened to us, but also think about what we can do to continue to have conversations with each other so these things don't happen again.
So where can we have these conversations? Matthew Keynes, the researcher of truth-telling commissions, says education is a key opportunity for where reform can take place.
So I studied truth-telling commissions around the world, including here in Australia, things like the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, the Bringing Them Home Commission, the Yoorrook Justice Commission, as well as commissions around the world, like in Canada and in Sweden, Norway, Finland. And some of the things that I've learned from studying those processes is that education is rarely included as a key partner in truth-telling. And that's a big mistake, I think, because in places where it has been included, in some processes in South America, Latin America, Africa, that we know about, there are much better outcomes long term. What tends to happen is education is just seen as a place where the recommendations can be dumped, to put it crudely, and where teachers will one day just pick up this burden of teaching this. And that's not very thoughtful, and it doesn't tap into all the potential of including, for instance, teachers, principals, curriculum writers, people in universities who are involved in designing educational materials in the process of truth-telling to make sure that they are going to have an impact from the outset and not just be something that is later a burden for teachers to take up.
But moving from a formal commission to the classroom can be slow and fraught.
So in both the case of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, which reported in the early 90s, and the Bringing Them Home Commission in the mid to late 90s, those commissions identified education as a key place for reform, as well as a key place where wrongdoings had taken place that had been really complicit in these harms that had occurred. They recommended far-reaching changes to education systems. And what actually has transpired is a lot less than what they envisioned. So in the case of Bringing Them Home, it took about 15 years for those recommendations to be actioned, and it was only the curriculum reforms, including knowledge about the stolen generations, that eventually took place. There was a lot of other suggestions for how to improve education that have not yet happened. So the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody found that education was one of the key underlying issues, along with health and housing, that increased the likelihood of Aboriginal people coming into contact with the judicial and custodial systems. And so addressing that by making schools places that Aboriginal kids can thrive and places that they want to engage with and that they want to come to was a key part of the recommendations. And I think that that's still an ongoing challenge that hasn't yet been realised. And we see that in places like the Northern Territory and Alice Springs, where there is a so-called crisis of truancy, where Aboriginal kids are not in school, probably because they're racist, they're unsafe places, they're not places that they want to be. So there's still a challenge there to implement the recommendations of the Commission.
As well as making schools a safe place where Aboriginal kids can thrive, past Royal Commissions have recommended curriculum reform. This is something that the Yoorrook Justice Commission and the Victorian Premier are also committed to.
So one of the things that the Bringing Them Home report recommended was that the curriculum of schools at all levels should include Aboriginal history and Aboriginal viewpoints on all matters. And a controversial review in 2018 found that this had been implemented because of what's called the cross-curriculum priority, which mandates Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives across all the curriculum. But when you dig into the research on this and talking to teachers and students, especially those young people, for instance, who went before the Yoorrook Commission, who say we still didn't get Aboriginal perspectives in our education. So we know that the cross-curriculum priority, although it is there, and that is fantastic, it's not necessarily being enacted. And so there's still a really important work to do to break down the barriers to realising the potential of that reform.
When Matthew Keynes gave his submission to the Yoorrook Justice Commission, he talked about the role and the potential of the school curriculum. Matthew gave evidence that history and social studies curricula have been a favoured tool of Australian governments to legitimate dispossession and settler violence. He argued that any recommendation Yoorrook makes for the reform of the history curriculum must take into account and learn from global experiences. especially from countries like Canada and South Africa, where curricular reforms have been linked to truth-telling processes. But Matthew says we can go further.
One of the things that I went before Yoorrook to advocate for is that the current curriculum in Victoria we have now is in fact really excellent, and it's about as good as it can get as a kind of colonial text. And what I mean by that is that this is still not a decolonised curriculum. There's a lot of opportunity for truth-telling, but it's still not a curriculum that is centering Indigenous knowledge. And I think that's a potential for change. Until we get a curriculum where the story of the settler nation, the last 250 odd years of history, is part of a bigger story of 65,000 plus years. Until we have a curriculum like that, I think we still have a long way to go. I certainly don't pretend to have the answers, but what I can tell you through studying history of education is that First Nations people have the answers to these problems, and they always have done. They have always articulated a desire for education, a wanting to access education. They've always wanted their young people to go to school, but also they have articulated desires for control of their own education and to teach their own young people their languages, their history, their cultures. And if we open our ears and we listen to First Nations people today and in the past, they've always said this. There is a lot of knowledge there. There are solutions there. It's just about the will to listen and to implement them.
Now, before we finish up, let's head back to Commissioner Travis Lovett and his walk for truth. Travis has walked for 25 days in the wet, in the wind and in the sunshine, from Portland to Parliament in Melbourne. That's around 500 kilometres, and over 14,000 people walked with him. We join him again on the final day of the Walk for Truth, Wednesday, June 18, 2025. There's 3,000 people walking with Travis as he arrives at Parliament House in Melbourne.
25 days ago, I left my homeland, Gunditjmara Country, at a place recently named Portland, with a small group of companions. I had the sea at one side and country on the other, both Aboriginal land and Aboriginal water. Justice is no longer a whisper, it is a road, and we are already on it. Thank you for walking with us. Now let's keep going.
Walk for truth. Truth.
The Yoorrook Justice Commission has now delivered its final 2 reports to the Governor of Victoria and to the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. The first report, Yoorrook for Transformation, has 100 recommendations. And the second report is called Yoorrook Truth Be Told. It's an official public record that includes a detailed account of the history of Victoria since the start of colonisation, as told by First Peoples and others to Yoorrook.
It comes with expectations that when we hand over the report and the recommendations, that they are implemented.
The first formal treaty negotiations in Australia are now underway in Victoria with First Nations peoples. Yoorrook's truth-telling work is supporting this treaty process, and many of the recommendations made by Yoorrook will be the subject of treaty negotiations. Here's Premier Jacinta Allan.
It is well understood that to drive a treaty process, you need to have truth.
As Commissioner Travis Lovett says,
We have the ability to change and influence the cultural fabric into the future. History has always been told by the oppressor, but for the first time in Australia's history, through a Royal Commission process, First Peoples of Victoria got to hold the pen.
This episode was produced on Gadigal and Gunditjmara land by Jane Curtis. And special thanks to Rachel Fife and the Yoorrook team. This episode was made possible by the Australian Centre for Public History and the Dusseldorp Forum, a family foundation committed to a just and equitable Australia, one that is caring, ethical and honours our First Peoples. History Lab is the UTS Impact Studios production. The executive producer of Impact Studios is Sarah Gilbert. And I'm Tamsin Peach from the Australian Centre for Public History. See you next time on History Lab.